Today we're going to be comparing the F-15E versus the F-16, and I'm going to give you real-world examples from having flown both. I flew the F-15E in combat situations, I flew the F-16 in training situations and in air shows throughout the world. I did become combat qualified in both of these aircraft, and I'm going to tell you just from my perspective what I felt and what I think we can all learn when we combine the best of both worlds. And maybe that jet could eventually be built one day. Lockheed, I hope you're watching. But ultimately, when it comes down to these two fighters are very closely related as far as the mindset of creating something new. So in the late 60s, early 70s, the F-15 kind of led the way, and the fighter mafia wanted to create an air superiority fighter. They wanted to create a fighter that no one could mess with, that was essentially unquestioned in air-to-air battles, and that was the F-15C. It was a few derivatives prior to that, but for ease, we're going to call it the F-15C. That was the air superiority version, which was a single-seat aircraft. Next was the F-15E, and that is a two-seat aircraft with a weapons systems officer in the back running lots of the beeps and squeaks, sometimes running the air-to-air radar, but more so running the air-to-ground radar, and the pod, the sniper pod, looking through that soda straw, helping to find targets while the pilot up front is essentially the taxi driver in some situations, albeit a taxi driver with an air-to-air radar and AMRAAMs loaded up and ready to go. Now you can use crew coordination in both situations, air-to-air and air-to-ground, but ultimately the F-15E to me was the evolution, the natural adaptation, a multi-role strike fighter that took the place of the United States' F-111 Aardvark. At the time, the Air Force was wondering, hey, do we build more F-111s, or do we go to this new concept that's going to basically pave the way for air superiority in the future, which is taking the F-15C and adapting it to be an interdiction aircraft with conformal fuel tanks, the ability to go deep into enemy territory, do interdiction missions, which means you fight your way in, you drop your bombs, and you fight your way out, and you have no escort. You have no fighter escort above you. You are it. You are essentially the judge, jury, executioner. You're the one on station making things happen. And the F-15E was just the evolution of that F-15C air superiority mindset applied to interdiction and air-to-ground. And having flown that beauty, that F-15E in combat, I'm here to tell you there's probably no other aircraft I would rather take into combat. At the end of the day, the F-15E to me really was a combat multiplier, primarily because having good crew coordination, having two people inside of it, that are good, right? Because if you have a bad pilot, a good Wizzo, a bad pilot, now you're kind of back to square one. You're backpedaling. You don't really know what's going on because you haven't cemented that crew coordination relationship like a good basketball team does, where you don't really have to say anything. You just kind of know that someone's going to pick and roll, and you know where to throw the ball. You know where to alley-oop. That's how it is if you have a good weapons systems officer and a good pilot in the front seat. When you're working on the same sheet of music in tandem, I mean, you're literally sitting in a tandem cockpit, and when you don't really have to say anything because you're seeing the good work that other aircrew member is doing on their screens by watching their cursors, watching where they're going, watching what they have designated on their situational displays. A lot of times in combat in the F-15E, we have what's called a SIT, or a situational display, which shows the different players in the battle space. So what I could do is I could use my HOTAS, I can remember what it is right now, it was castle up. I could castle to the Wizzo's situational display and make sure I could see where the friendlies were, where the bomb was designated to, and where we were. Cool, everything looks good, our run-in looks good. All of that was made possible by having two people in that cockpit. And I tell you what, having dropped a lot of bombs in combat, having that ability to look around and fly around these massive 12,000 plus foot mountains while the Wizzo is in the back making it happen was something that just made me feel so much better about dropping bombs in combat. And it just helped me really cement in my brain where friendly forces were, and it gave me the ability to really know who we were dropping the bombs on, and making sure that we were keeping friendly forces safe during all those engagements. And then you throw in a 2-ship of F-15Es and having the ability to have 4 people up there cross-checking each other's work. Again, if you're skilled aircrew members, which 98% of those I flew with were, it just gives you more eyes in the sky, more big brains up there making it happen. But that is if all those aircrew members have the be an athlete, make it happen mentality. You get one bad apple up there who really doesn't know what they're doing or hasn't done the work, and now you've got double the chances of being less combat capable as opposed to just having 2 pilots. But it's the same in F-16s. If you have a 4-ship and one of the pilots in the 4-ship isn't carrying their weight, then it's going to drag down the entire team. But I really had great experiences by having a Wizzo in the back seat. If nothing else, it was just awesome having someone up there to talk to on long missions. But the F-15E itself was built for that 2-place mindset. It was built knowing that you're going to have teamwork to get things done. And when it came to dogfighting in the F-15E, I mean, I loved it, don't get me wrong, but the F-15E is a big beast. It bleeds off energy extremely fast compared to the F-16, which we're going to get to here in a second, but the conformal fuel tanks on the F-15E really give you 1 to 2 moves in a dogfight, and if you can't be aggressive and get the shot off, then you're really gonna be at a big disadvantage. And now just quickly moving to the F-16, we'll do the comparisons here in a second, but I just wanna talk to the F-16 because the F-16, although it wasn't my first love, I got to fly it so many times. I have over 1,000 hours in the F-16. Most of the missions were shorter. You know, you're talking an hour or less missions. Just the fact that that thing was built for the pilot really stood out for me. So John Boyd set out on what was called the lightweight fighter program after Vietnam. Seeing those close-in dogfights, some may call it a knife fight in a phone booth, seeing those happen probably just made the hair on the back of the necks of fighter pilots of the day stand on edge. Because even though the F-4s were good, they weren't extremely maneuverable, potentially not as maneuverable as the MiG-21, even though the F-4s did really good against them. But you look at like a legacy fighter like an F-105, the fact that that thing couldn't turn with anything, I mean, it couldn't fight a barn door, just made the fighter mafia probably say, look, we've got to change this. And that's when John Boyd started getting funding for the lightweight fighter program. And they contracted General Dynamics and Northrop to help them build designs that had better thrust to weight ratios and could essentially accelerate under high G forces, because that makes you a dogfighting monster. I mean, if you don't bleed off all your energy, i.e. like the F-15E might do, potentially the F-15 is going to do more than the F-16. If you don't bleed off that energy and you're able to accelerate at 9 Gs, 400 knots, you just have options. And then you ease off on the power and you really square a corner. You really have options in the F-16 to be a superior dogfighter. And that is exactly what that thing was made for. So having flown the F-16 myself, getting to shoot the gun, do air combat maneuvers, which is 2 versus 1, BFM basic fighter maneuvers, which is 1v1, just seeing the way that you can operate that aircraft and max perform it, and the way that it's built for a single pilot concept mentality just made it fun. It just made it so fun to fly. It was like riding in a crotch rocket, and I'll never forget my flights in the F-16. Just a tip of the hat to all the designers, the reasons why it was created. I really got to feel the ability of that thing to dogfight, and it's like no other. I mean, it gives you so many different options. Okay, now that I've tipped the hat to both of these jets, seriously, some of the just coolest aircraft on the planet. I mean, the F-16 is the most widely used military fighter aircraft in the world. There's like 2,200 plus of these things operating around the globe. Just these aircraft are insane. The F-15's got a 104-0 win to loss air-to-air supremacy ratio. I mean, talk about putting some W's up on the board. Like, these two aircraft are just insane, and I'm a little bit excited if you can't tell. Now we got to talk about the differences and who wins in each situation. So let's talk about the stick, the center stick in the F-15E versus the side stick in the F-16. So the center stick in the F-15E, and the fact that you can over G the crap out of the F-15, all you get are a few beeps telling you you're about to over G. It just made flying it a little more stressful, and you had to focus way more on actual feel of the aircraft. You basically did a 3/4 stick deflection pull to get your brake turn in, and then you would blend the stick back to the seat pan is what we called it. That's the little pan on the ejection seat. Doing that just took away a lot of brain bites when you're looking outside, you're trying to figure out where your wingman is, and oh, by the way, you're looking over the stick, which is blocking the screens in front of you. So that's the F-15E stick. When it comes to the F-16, it's a side stick, and it's basically a pressure sensor that moves 3/4 of an inch. So it just gives you a little bit of deflection, but once you get good at it and you get the feel for it, and you know that you don't have to think about over-G'ing the F-16, just gives you the ability to max perform that aircraft like I never knew possible in the F-15. So in this category, and the fact that you have the F-16 stick on the side so you can look at all your screens, you're not looking up and over that stick. Because of those things, I gotta give the nod to the F-16 in this situation. The side stick is just so Gucci. And then let's talk crew coordination. So having two in the cockpit, having the ability to talk to a really good Wizzo. I had situations where I didn't really say a word actually, and I was just getting past targets. And this was in training. I was shooting training missiles at these targets over and over and over and over, just wailing away. We landed and I was like, dude, that felt like a video game. We were so in sync and it was so good. And then in combat, having the Wizzo locking up targets on the ground, helping me designate, know where the bomb's gonna go, helping me get tally on other aircraft flying around me or tally on ground targets prior to rolling in and doing a strafe mission. I mean, these things were just huge. So in the crew coordination piece, like, having peace and quiet in the cockpit, don't get me wrong, that's nice. But you still have a wingman up there, so there's still someone up there talking to you. But as far as in combat, I would rather have the Wizzo with me. So in this case, in the dogfight, I'd rather have the F-16. So I'd rather have that as opposed to an F-15E. But in air-to-ground combat interdiction missions, the F-15E is just so incredible. So when it comes to one pilot versus two air crew, I'm gonna give the nod to the two air crew in this situation. And then we gotta talk about pulling G's. So I like pulling G's just as much as the next guy or gal, but don't get me wrong, some days I wasn't a G monster. The seat in the F-16 is reclined. I believe it's somewhere around 30 degrees of a recline. Having that just gives your body the ability to keep the blood pushed up into your brain a lot more than in the F-15, which is straight up and down. It's like an uncomfortable recliner made of metal. That's what the F-15 made me feel like. And when you're pulling G's in that, it's just way harder and more elaborate move for your body to push and pull all the blood up to your brain. So you're squeezing everything. You have a G suit in both of these aircraft. You're squeezing everything while you're sitting straight up is just harder rather than leaning back, squeezing and then pulling, getting on the pull in the F-16 and getting up to those 9 Gs and sustaining it. Having that recline was just incredible. So even though you're pulling more Gs most likely in the F-16, I mean, you are definitely than the F-15E. I'll give the nod to the F-16 for having that reclined seat. I mean, if we can be comfortable, why not? If we can put sheepskin on these seats, why don't we do it? And then we gotta talk about the canopy. So this is probably one of the biggest distinguishing features between these two aircraft. The F-15E and the EX, they all have a canopy bow out in front of you that blocks your view in certain regimes of flight. The F-16 has a bubble canopy, which gives you an unencumbered, beautiful, essentially 360-degree view that you could really never want anything else. I mean, it's like Christmas morning every time you fly an F-16, just because you have that bubble canopy. There's even space over the side of the rail for you to tuck your helmet into and look down the side of your aircraft. I mean, that bubble canopy to me was one of the greatest inventions in fighter aviation, and that's why John Boyd, the fighter mafia, they were so adamant about making every little detail of the F-16 oriented towards dogfighting, and having the bubble canopy definitely did that. I mean, if you've seen some of my videos online, even flying the F-15C in combat situations on the DCS, the simulator, basically your canopy bow is blocking the adversary some of the time. So that gives you an idea of what I actually dealt with in the cockpit itself. So having that canopy bow to me was a bit of a limiting factor. So in this one, I'll give the nod to the Viper, to the F-16. And then next we gotta talk about technology. So both of these can have different suites. So that's just basically software updates that can go into these jets. So they can both be updated. I do think having the two-place cockpit where both of you are looking at the screens, having slightly bigger screens that the F-15E has, made it a little bit easier just to read and interpret the information that you're seeing. So when it came to combat situations, having the technology of the F-15E, I would much prefer that than maybe some of the more antiquated hardware, some of the more antiquated screens that I found in the F-16. However, the F-16, again, they know it's a single pilot cockpit, so a lot of things have to be automated. So I would say it's a little more automated than the F-15E, but I would still give the nod in technology just because of the bigger screens and the bigger HUD of the F-15E. That was just so nice, not having to duck and turn your head so much to see that HUD. That was huge. But then when you bring in the helmet mounted cueing system, the HMD, where you can see everything on your visor, it pretty much equals that out, but we'll give a slight edge to technology to the F-15E in that situation. So okay, overall, what I learned from these two epic aircraft that I feel so lucky to have flown. I mean, the F-15E is like the Tesla Model S. It's the sports car that just looks good. It just looks like it makes love to the air as it's flying through the air. It just looks phenomenal. And then the F-16, it's the crotch rocket of fighter jets. The things like a rocket ship that you strap onto your body and launch yourself off. I mean, it almost seems like it shouldn't even be possible. And the flight control system in the F-16 is a fly-by-wire. It's all electronic, so really it's not possible. It's basically defying physics and gravity by the way that the flight control systems move in the F-16 to actually keep it flying. The F-15E, you feel buffet, you feel more of the train track sensation when the air starts to slow down or the air starts to give you different vibrations. You don't really feel any of that in the F-16. So maybe if we're flying the F-16, we're just in a simulation the entire time. But seriously, the F-15E, the F-16, to me, the perfect situation would be to combine the best of both of these worlds. I mean, if you could build an F-15, 2 seats, 2 engines like the F-15EX, but then you had the big HUD combined with a side stick that you could not over G. That would give you the ability to have that pressure sensor. Then you would have all the screens in front of you, make things a little more automated, build it off of a single pilot concept, even though you know you have 2 in there for the crew coordination piece. So then you could really hone in and focus on the air to ground parts. And then, hey, give the Wizzo a helmet mounted cueing system, and then you have the best of all worlds. Recline that seat, so then you've really got kind of like an F-15EX with adaptations of the F-16, and to me that would just be the best of all worlds. Ultimately, flying both of them was incredible. I feel so grateful for having the opportunity. Thanks for checking out the video, guys. If you liked it, please check out another video over here. I'm also launching a podcast. It's not necessarily going to be aviation related. It's going to be based on human performance, maximizing life, and just learning about the world from awesome guests. If you're interested in that, check it out. Just click the link down in the description and I'll see you on the podcast. Thanks so much for watching. Most of all, have a great day. We'll see you on the next video.